Good afternoon, everyone. This is Erica Oriens from the Michigan Community College Association. Thank you for joining us today for our recap webinar focused on the MiTransfer Pathways Summit that we hosted at Jackson College on November 2nd. Today, we're going to go over what happened in the full day at that summit, and you get the pleasure of hearing about that in less than an hour. So I hope we're able to provide you with a good summary of what our faculty and transfer liaisons did at this meeting. I am joined today by Will Emerson from the Michigan Association of State Universities, Shannon Price from the Michigan Independent Colleges and Universities, and Katie Girodello, who is a project consultant on this project. And we will all be sharing this presentation with you today. If you have questions, you should be able to see a small icon that says questions or chat in your question or chat pane. And if you just want to type your questions in there, we'll be able to see those and answer them either at the end or if it seems appropriate to interrupt during the presentation at that time. Before I turn it over to Dr. Emerson, for those of you who are on the webinar, if you could go to your attendee list and you should see a little icon where you can raise your hand. If you could raise your hand right now, just to make sure that I know that you can hear me. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. So with that, please, once again, enter your questions in the question pane, and I will turn it over to Dr. Emerson.
Hello, everybody. So I began the day by welcoming the group. It was a good-sized group. Over 200 people were there, really telling them about the importance of this work. The project objective, of course, is making the overall transfer experience more efficient, easy to understand, and simple to navigate, which is a key portion of this. That simple to navigate part of it is something that we emphasize throughout the day, of course, while optimizing credit transfer.
Sorry, Will.
As you can see from this slide, 52% of all students in the state of Michigan who complete a bachelor's degree, at least in the 2015-2016 year, began at another institution. So you can see that is really become more or less the norm. We have more than half the students in the state are starting somewhere else, whether it be at one of our great community colleges, one of our independent universities, or one of our public universities. Here are the transfer outcomes after 6 years. You can see the transfer out rate nationally is 31.5%, so we actually spike higher than that at 35.3%. However, when you look at the transfer with an award rate, it's 33.6% nationally, but less than a quarter of our students are finishing that associate's degree before they transfer. The final portion of this, 42% are transferring out with a bachelor's degree, meaning they complete that bachelor's degree. The state of Michigan, it's just over a third. So clearly, we need a better strategy. We can do better for our students, and that's really what this project is all about. So for every 3 who transfer, really only 1 gets that degree. This slide right here, I really like this slide. We tend to think of somebody starting at a local community college and then transferring to a local university. It's a real, it's a way of thinking I think a lot of us fall into, a very traditional way of thinking. However, you can see from this slide, people are transferring all across the state. So, for example, somebody who starts off at Oakland Community College, I used to work with OCC a great deal. I assumed that the vast majority were going to Oakland University, but you can see that tendril going up to the top to Western Michigan University. Western has great programs, but they're not in close proximity to OCC. Nevertheless, students are transferring there. Now, part of the reason for that may be that some of these institutions, many of them in fact, have multiple centers or campuses around the state. So, for example, Siena Heights University has 9 different centers around the state. You don't necessarily need to go to Adrian to go to Siena Heights. In fact, you can start off at Lansing Community College and then take classes at Siena Heights on LCC's campus. So students are transferring all over. Ultimately, if it were as simple as somebody starting at one community college and then transferring to a local university, we wouldn't need to be involved because they could handle that. We are here, in fact, to compensate for or to make amends for all the students who are transferring literally everywhere across the state, trying to make that transfer process simpler to navigate. This work, of course, is coordinated by the Transfer Steering Committee. The Transfer Steering Committee is focused on increasing student success, which began in the fall of 2016. Representatives from community colleges, public universities, so 15 from the public universities, roughly the same number from the community colleges, 3 members of macro with roughly the same number from the independent colleges, and then ex officio members like myself are part of that work. And what the TSC does is to select the pathways and guide these strategies. So the strategies we have in place are, of course, to replace the Michigan Transfer Network. We'll be talking about that more later on. To develop multi-institutional associate to bachelor degree transfer pathways. Align mathematics requirements within programs of study. To increase awards for academic credit for military experience, spotlight best practices to improve transfer student outcomes, and of course, produce and utilize data on transfer student outcomes. That producing and utilizing data is an important part of all this. This is the Michigan Transfer Network as it currently stands. I mentioned us upgrading the MTN. You can see that this was an award-winning website in 2006. That, of course, is a long time ago. It's still a functioning website. However, it really needed to have more contemporary features, more of a contemporary look, be something that students would tend to recognize and would be more appealing to them. This is the current iteration of the upgrade to the MTN, which is the MiTransfer website. Of course, we're doing all this work in conjunction with macro. Macro has been weighing in and giving us a lot of support and information on how to do this properly. You can see the 4 buckets across the middle of the screen to plan your transfer your courses, and then the MTA and MiTransfer pathways. That's really from left to right the process a student will go through. So they begin thinking about their transfer, they look to see, are my courses equivalent? How does the MTA plug into this? And if it doesn't, what can I do to meet MTA requirements, have that conversation? And then what pathways are available? Does my major, in fact, fit into some sort of a pathway? So left to right, that's the process. We have a hero image up at the top, the young woman standing in a collegiate environment. You can see it's kind of an autumnal scene. That's really more of a back-to-school scene. We've solicited images from our member institutions that will then reflect different parts of the year. So, for example, the student visits the site in the spring, they'll see more of a commencement type of an image. And that is both aspirational, so that students see that and say, hey, that's the school I'd like to go to, but it also identifies the school a student may be at. So they see that and they say, wow, that's my school that's down there. So it's a way to plug students in and also to show off some of the great institutions we have around the state. We have a video in the middle of the screen and then 4 more buckets across the bottom. One for faculty and advisors, one for administrators, which allows administrators to run a lot of different sorts of reports, including reports which may indicate the sorts of majors that students are generally looking up when they come to the website. There's a tab about MiTransfer. They want to learn more about the project. And then contact information. I think that's one, although it's not the most visually exciting tab on the page, I think that's very beneficial to students because it helps to humanize the process. So rather than giving a general number at a university or a community college or a private university, it gives them a person's name and the contact number so that it feels more familiar to them. And I think that's important for many types of traditionally underserved students, veterans, first-generation students, and so forth. So here are the pathways we've selected. Phase 1, of course, biology, business, criminal justice, and psychology. Phase 2, we have communication, computer science, mechanical engineering, and social work. And phase 3, we have art, English, exercise science and kinesiology, and public health. So you may be wondering, well, how did the Transfer Steering Committee come up with these majors? Well, We use information from the Community College Research Center, just great data coming out of that organization. They publish a lot of good work. iPEDS data, of course, and then Michigan Hot 50 jobs. So really looking at where are those majors with lots of students, and where do they intersect with employment, like these areas of employment where we see obvious growth. Those are the majors that we want. So it's like the largest majors in the state intersecting with those job opportunities as well. We always, when the TSC gets together, we have a conversation that tends to be very democratic. We'll discuss the different majors, we'll debate, and then we'll vote and move forward. And also, we receive lessons from other states. So it's not that we're trying to reinvent the wheel. Rather, we're looking at best practices. How has this been done in other states? Where did they have success? Where did they have shortcomings? What were the challenges they faced? How can we do this as efficiently as possible to the greatest benefit for our students across the state? And we looked at California, Colorado, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Minnesota. We got a lot of information from those states, contacted some of those folks, and really are using the work that they did, not as a full template, but certainly to augment the types of work that we're doing here. Again, our mission is to increase associate and bachelor's degree completion among transfer students from all backgrounds through collaboration among Michigan colleges and universities and engagement with faculty and higher education administrators. This is transformative work. The work that we are doing here will mean more students are ready for transfer. And this isn't about taking the rigor out of the classes. The classes will still be challenging and engaging classes. This is about taking the rigor out of the process, removing these artificial barriers, making it easier to transfer so students have that positive transfer experience. It's about improving that transfer experience for students so they don't lose time or money and don't lose hope. We don't want students to feel that maybe they're doing something wrong, that the reason they're struggling is because of any number of reasons that are separate from the transfer process itself. We want the transfer process to be simple so that students can navigate that, have a positive experience matriculating from one school to the next. And lastly, this whole conversation throughout the MiTransfer process has been valuable. I had faculty members tell me this morning the value that they've felt and just being able to speak with other faculty members around the state to eliminate sometimes there's the idea that this school or that school is doing things vastly differently regarding these courses like Introduction to Chemistry or Introduction to Criminal Justice, and the idea that by getting faculty members together, we can see that there is, in fact, a greater commonality, that we have more in common that we do that's different. And there's real value to that. The sense of community that's developed around these meetings is kind of, it's by accident rather than design. We didn't intend that at the onset, but what a wonderful development that's been. And lastly, this is, of course, a defining moment. Our three sectors have not partnered like this in the past. The level of partnership and cooperation is just unprecedented in the state of Michigan. And it marks a turning point in our state's higher education history with regard to coming together on a statewide basis, certainly to benefit students. It will benefit our institutions as well. But this is really about helping those students, about making it easier for them to fulfill their dreams, not about making those courses easier, but about eliminating those obstructions that have been put in place. And it's really an inflection point and a defining moment.
Thanks, Will. This is Shannon Price with Michigan Independent Colleges and Universities, and we represent 26 of the independent private colleges in Michigan. And at the day of the summit, we had some table conversations to start off the day. And so at the summit, participants were seated with their program sections, so the sections of communication, computer science, mechanical engineering, and social work. And in those sections, they were seated with people that were from different institutions, different sectors, and it was an opportunity for them to talk about transfer students and transfer work. And so the questions that we reviewed are, what is the typical transfer student experience at your institution? What transfer struggles do you hear about at your institution? How is or isn't the institution addressing these struggles? What do you wish you understood better about the transfer student experience? How does this type of project help your institution's transfer students? What other transfer priorities are important for your institution to consider? And who are your transfer partners, and what is the relationship like between your institutions? So during this section of the day, the tables, they had the conversations, and then we did some popcorn sharing so we could share some responses. The responses all had the general theme of the importance of making transfer student success a priority, also the importance of providing tailored transfer pathways, which is what we are doing within this work. So it was good to hear the different institutions and the different programs talk about just the dedicated resources, how it's important to have dedicated resources to support transfer students. And then Erica, I believe you're next here.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me, Shannon?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. My phone actually dropped the call for a sec. Sorry about that. So let me get back on the slide here. So we're going to go ahead and transition and talk a little bit about what the faculty did during the afternoon while they were together. So some of you may have been attended one of these webinars or attended the event that we had on May 18th with the Phase 1 faculty. And the faculty that attended this meeting went through a similar process as the folks did on May 18th. And our goal in the afternoon session was to work with the faculty groups to identify required, recommended, optional, and appropriate courses that meet associate and bachelor's degree program requirements in the first and second year. And that is a mouthful, but I read that because I think that every word in that sentence is very important. Because what we're trying to do is collectively across all of our institutions, really identify the courses that students should take in their first and second year, which of course would be the courses that meet associate degree requirements, and then work with universities to make sure that those courses apply to the bachelor's degree. On the right-hand side of this slide, we prepared kind of an image of what that breakdown looks like in the work that we're doing. As many of you know, Michigan institutions signed the Michigan Transfer Agreement in the fall of 2014, which allowed students to transfer 30 credit hours of the general education to participating institutions. And that really will serve as the foundation of these MiTransfer pathways agreements that we're creating in these 4 programs. What we're really doing, or what we did on November 2nd, and what we're asking faculty and transfer liaisons to continue to do, is to align a few major specific courses and then identify some of the electives that students need to complete before they transfer to the university. There's a few assumptions that we reviewed because, of course, language can get in our way sometimes. And I'll point out that what we mean is that by required, recommended, optional, and appropriate courses are courses that students should complete to meet degree requirements. So what are we telling our students to meet? What are universities telling students to take who maybe didn't transfer, who started at the university? We refer to courses in the first and second year, and what we're referring to there are courses that should typically be completed in the first 60 hours or the first half of the program. We recognize that some students enroll part-time and they won't complete those courses in 2 years, but just for the ease of the language, we use the term in the first and second year. We also assume in this process the student has selected a major. And so one of the issues that we face in higher education when students come to our doors is trying to help them select a major and what area or field of study they're interested in. And what we're doing in this process is really just documenting what students should take once they have selected a major. We recognize that we have a lot of work to do to help students select a major, to help students explore careers and identify programs. But this is really about if a student has selected that major, what should they take? Which of course may help students decide what they want to major in if it's very clear to them what courses they need to take. And we also recognize that this activity focuses on students who intend to earn an associate degree and a bachelor's degree. We know that students enroll in colleges and universities never intending to earn a degree, and many transfer students never intend on earning an associate degree. But this process is focused on those students who do want to earn an associate degree before they transfer. We had a fairly limited amount of time to meet with the faculty, and so we asked them to engage in a fairly structured process to be able to identify those courses that students should take in the first and second year. So I'm going to go over each of the steps in this process. So the first thing that we ask them to do is to review the required, recommended, optional, and appropriate courses in their particular program that they are recommending that students complete or requiring that students complete, that may meet program-specific requirements, electives, required general education courses, or other degree requirements. And thinking about the courses that students need to take so that they're ready for upper division coursework. So what courses do students need to take in the first and second year? And if they miss those courses, it may mean it would delay their ability to graduate in 4 years if that's what the student expected to do. So we ask people to think about that. This is sometimes, we have created this arbitrary line in between the second and the third year, or the first half of the program and the second half. And we recognize that a lot of times we don't think about our degree programs in that way, at the associate degree program or the bachelor's degree program. So we ask folks to reflect on that. And then in the room that we were in, and I'll show you this in a second, we asked of those courses, we asked faculty to tell us what are those courses that you are requiring or recommending students take in the first and second year. So for example, in the case of computer science, we know that all of the computer science programs in the state require Calculus 1. And so we identified that course already. But we asked faculty to identify other courses as well, which is reflected here on this blank sheet. And then we would add those courses onto there that may have not been identified in our research of the program. Then what we asked faculty to do is we provided them with a sheet of labels, like mailing address labels, that said their institution's name on them. And we had what you're seeing here in this image on the right-hand side of the screen is one of those giant Post-it notes that you can put up on the wall. And we asked the university faculty to tell us, is this course, in this case, General Chemistry 1, required, recommended, or optional or appropriate in the first and second year for biology majors, for example? And you can see here that every university said yes. And at the bottom of the page, we asked the community colleges, do you offer this course at the community college? And you can see in this course that all of the faculty said yes. The faculty did this for many, many courses that may be required or recommended in the first or second year. And then they took those courses and they put them primarily into two different buckets, if you will. On the left-hand side, the courses that were commonly required, recommended, optional, or appropriate in the first and second year. And on the right-hand side, those courses that at some institutions they're required, some institutions they're not required. And then that helped us also to identify for those community colleges who offered those courses or not. This was helpful information to know if we are not offering those courses at the community college, and they're commonly required in the first and second year, we may want to consider beginning to offer those courses, and then vice versa for the courses that may or may not be universal as well. Then we asked everyone to discuss. So this took up a large chunk of our time as well. So let's talk about these. Let's try to, this was a great opportunity for faculty from both community colleges and universities to engage with each other, ask questions about what they were recommending. In many cases, we found that there was a strong interest in aligning courses so that we had more commonality across institutions in the first and second year that would make it easier for students to transfer. And then we were able to identify opportunities where we could evaluate the syllabus and determine if those courses were transferable as well. And then the last thing that faculty did in this session was to begin to document these courses. So this whole process resulted in these courses that were commonly required, recommended, optional, or appropriate in the first and second year are what we are referring to as the MiTransfer pathway courses. So those are the courses that are commonly agreed upon courses that transfer across all of those institutions. Now, I will say that so far we have worked with 8 different programs and a little bit more like 9, which we'll explain in a little bit. But each of these different types of programs has some unique issues that we face with those programs. But generally, what we're asking faculty to do is to identify those MiTransfer Pathways courses that are common across all institutions. And then you'll see on this worksheet template here that we have a section at the bottom that are the remaining degree requirements, and those align nicely with the courses back here that were not universally required across institutions. So this process leads us to identifying what students should be taking in their program. We also recognize that sometimes there are issues that we just don't have time to address in these meetings, and so we ask faculty to write those up on a parking lot type of thing, and then they will be meeting together again in May of 2019, and we will definitely address some of those parking lot issues. The other thing that we've been focusing on in this project is mathematics. So many of you know that math can be a barrier for students to completion, and we want to make sure that students are taking the right math at the right time, which is the kind of title of our Math Pathways project here in Michigan. So what is a mathematics pathway? It's a math course or sequence of courses that students take them to meet the requirements of their program of study. In the MTA, we have 3 mathematics pathways, and they are quantitative reasoning, statistics, and what we call preparation for calculus, which is typically something on the spectrum between college algebra, trig, pre-calc, and calculus. So something on that pathway. I'll also note that this is consistent with the math pathways that many other states are adopting as well, these 3 math pathways. As I said, in 2015, MCCA and MASU were accepted into a grant program with the Charles A. Dana Center at the University of Texas at Austin to work on this Math Pathways work across institutions in Michigan. That committee in 2016 came out with 3 recommendations. The first recommendation was to establish a process to align learning outcomes for those introductory college-level Math Pathways courses in quantitative reasoning, statistics, and college algebra. To support program faculty and administrators in adopting appropriate Math Pathways courses aligned with the students' educational goals and program of study, which is specifically what we were doing with this project when we brought faculty together on November 2nd. And then the third strategy was to promote the widespread implementation of evidence-based approaches to increase the number of underprepared students who are successful in mathematics pathways courses. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those strategies in detail. Many of you know we are maintaining a website at MiTransfer.net that provides a lot of information about this project. And if you go to the MiTransfer Pathways tab and go to Phase 2 Meeting 1, you will see a link to all of the learning outcomes for these three math pathways. So we've identified those learning outcomes, and institutions can choose to align their programs to those learning outcomes to really be able to help the transferability of those courses. I provided here a list of just this brief description of what those learning outcomes are, but you can see some additional details in the documentation, which I will say is wonderful, that the MyRight Math folks put together. As I said earlier, the second strategy really is to adopt a math pathway in the program. And what we're asking folks to do is to say, okay, for this program of study, what's the math pathway that you'll accept? And when we share with you the outcomes of this meeting, we will be able to tell you which math pathway each of these programs selected. Generally, we see mathematics pathways in quantitative reasoning is aligned nicely with the liberal arts. Statistics is often selected in the social sciences, and then the preparation for calculus pathway is often selected in business and STEM fields, because those are the students that need to begin in college algebra to be prepared for calculus or courses, mathematics courses beyond calculus. And then finally, our strategy to support underprepared students really, I think, falls into two buckets, if you will. And they include revising our placement practices, and specifically identifying if a student is underprepared by using a multiple measures approach, not just a high stakes placement test that a student takes when they decide to enroll at the institution, but using their high school GPA, high school grades, and accurate assessments to determine where the students need to be placed. And then somewhat related to that is a movement that we're seeing across the country where institutions are adopting co-requisite remediation. Many community colleges across the country, instead of teaching one semester of developmental English and then one semester, followed by one semester of college level English, have chosen to do co-requisite remediation, which essentially means that the student takes the college level English course at the same time that they're receiving supports through another course or additional credit hours of enrollment. So instead of doing that sequentially, we're doing that at the same time through a co-requisite model. Several colleges have been doing that in Michigan in English for a long time, but we are now seeing that institutions are finding success doing this in quantitative reasoning, in statistics, and potentially in college algebra as well. So we're encouraging institutions to adopt a co-requisite model there as well. And this just goes back to what kind of wrapping up what our goal was today for the math pathway. Will provided a nice overview of the MiTransfer and the new Michigan Transfer Network, which will be housed at MiTransfer.org, MiTransfer.org. And you can actually follow the progress on the development of this site by going to dev.mytransfer.org. And I'll put that in the chat box after I'm done talking here. And as Will mentioned earlier, students will still be able to look up their transfer course equivalencies and information about the Michigan Transfer Agreement, but we'll also house information about these MiTransfer pathways on this site as well. So on this aggregated site of this transfer work across Michigan, students will be able to access information about the MiTransfer pathways. And in this work, you know, I think Will mentioned we are following a similar process and trying to meet similar goals as several other states who are doing this work. Most notably, I think, are Connecticut, Colorado, and Minnesota, who are also bringing together their faculty from community colleges and universities to identify these statewide pathways. And one of the goals of that is really to increase efficiency, of course, because so many of you are out there executing articulation agreements with individual institutions, and this opportunity to do that collectively, we can realize some efficiencies in Michigan as well. The other benefit of this process is very much so that when students enroll at a community college, if we're able to document what courses they need to take in the first and second year, and if the majority of those credit hours are the same across institutions, and we know that those courses are going to transfer, that gives students great opportunity to explore where they would like to transfer. They have more flexibility, as many students who enroll directly at a university, to pick more strategic electives and to fill out a much more a program that is much more aligned to their needs, as opposed to, for example, you know, taking one mathematics course because they might transfer to one university and a different mathematics course if they want to transfer someplace else. So providing them with that opportunity to be able to maximize their academic program, because, you know, we all know that they often have very limited credit hours to be able to do that. So a lot of great opportunity here, and I think also many wonderful opportunities for faculty from across the state to engage with each other. For this second phase of Pathways, as we said, we convene those faculty on November 2nd to identify the courses. Between now and the spring of 2019, we are asking them to work together to try to make those direct equivalents between the institutions. And then the faculty will come back together on May 14th to start to design those program maps. So they'll be working on those program worksheets that we provided, and we'll come back together on May 14th to be able to refine that. We'll sign an articulation agreement, and we will start building pages on the MiTransfer site so that we can welcome students to these pathways after those agreements are signed and after we're ready to execute those. So that covers what we did in the agenda at 10:45. So I just provided you with about a, 20-minute overview, 15-minute overview of what we did in about 45 minutes. And then maybe you could go have a snack now, because at this point the faculty went and had lunch. And then they got together and, as I described, identified those courses in the MiTransfer pathways. And then they had a break, and we came back together to share the outcomes from those breakout sessions and talked about next steps. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Katie, who is going to talk about what the outcomes were from those breakouts. Katie?
Thanks, Erica. Nice job. All right. Hi, everybody. My primary impetus for sharing with you today is to right off the bat here share which courses were discussed or endorsed among the faculty as being the common courses that Erica suggested that we are calling the MiTransfer Pathways courses. So in the next few slides, you're going to see a listing of those courses. You do not need to worry about writing these down, because the good news is that in a few more slides, I'm going to show you where you'll find customized worksheets that have these courses already input so that you can easily reference them as needed if your institution is looking to jump into the work and move along with us. So you'll see here for the communication pathway, there are a number of courses that are listed there. Public speaking, interpersonal communication, small group communication, intercultural communication, and then there's an intro to communication studies. This was not a universal win, if you will. So at this time, it's being called a tentative MiTransfer course, but there is some hope that with syllabi sharing and further discussion, this could be included in this pathway. The communication faculty decided that either a QR or a statistics pathway would be acceptable as a recommended course in the MTA section. We'll move to the mechanical engineering list. This was significantly longer. It does make sense when you consider the discipline. Engineering is pretty regulated and their accreditors have a lot to say about what competencies should be taught in the program. And as a result, the courses are often quite similar. So the mechanical engineering folks came up with a number of mathematics courses, which are on the first line there. There's a Calc 1 through 3 series, differential equations, and linear algebra. There are several science courses, Physics 1 and 2. These should be calculus-based for these students in this major. A Chemistry 1 course with a lab. By the way, the physics courses also need to have a lab, and that is denoted on the worksheet. Statics, dynamics, a class that is usually either called Mechanics of Solids or Strengths of Materials. This is also tentative because there wasn't as much consensus here, or there weren't as many community colleges cataloging this course currently, but it was identified as an opportunity to continue thinking about for another course in this pathway. There's also an outlier that is a first-year experience type of course. Some people call this a survey course. Other people have different names for it, but it tends to cover similar competencies. And this was placed in the parking lot, but there's a strong thought among the faculty that there's something that can be done with this type of course, whether it becomes a common course in the MiTransfer list or it becomes what we're calling a strategic transfer elective that could be denoted in a separate section of the worksheet. So the mechanical engineers had a lot of courses that are listed there. And we'll move forward and see what the computer science guys had to say, guys and gals, excuse me. So as Erica said, we had kind of an extra group joining us, and the computer science folks were also joined with groups that we were calling CIS, which is sort of a way of describing the diverse computer type fields that are out there in Michigan institutions. But the computer science faculty had the opportunity to identify the 4 courses you see on the screen: Programming 1 and 2, Data Structures, and then a Calculus 1 course, which would then also be the mathematics pathway that was recommended for the MTA. Joining them were faculty from other types of computer programs, which again, we are calling computer information systems. And while they were not able to converge on particular courses for a linear transfer pathway yet, they were able to find some consensus amongst the different types of programs that are offered at the community college, typically in the applied associate's degrees in programming, networking, and cybersecurity. That group would like to continue to discuss a bachelor's completion pathway for these types of degrees. And the primary focus will be identifying what types of degrees already exist at universities in Michigan, or what types of degrees might have promise to be developed, and how those actually transfer. Can the applied degree transfer as is in full, or is that not working as perhaps it is intended to? So this is something that is definitely sort of on the parking lot for phase 2 at large, but we hope the group will be able to make some additional progress on that as phase 2 continues. And then the group that I had the pleasure of working with were our social work faculty in Michigan. And they were able to come to consensus on Introduction to Psychology, Introduction to Sociology, Introduction to Social Work, a human biology course, and the recommendation to pursue statistics for the MTA mathematics requirement. There were a number of other classes discussed in social work that might fulfill what, again, we're calling these strategic transfer electives that I'll explain further in just a moment. But because the programs by and large were fairly diverse and students were not really specializing or choosing more focused areas in social work until the upper division, there were not as many courses in social work in common in the first 2 years. But as I said, a number of those potential transfer electives were discussed that we will talk about as we look at the program worksheets. So what happens next? We have those course listings in mind. So institutions that wish to participate in any one of those pathways need to attend to the next steps, which you saw there was a brief listing, and I'm going to talk briefly through each one of the areas here that are what we have identified as the next steps to this work. So the first, and what I think is probably one of the most important elements of our project, is completing the program worksheet. And on the MiTransfer project website, which again we'll discuss here in a few minutes, you can receive or you can obtain these resources including the customized program worksheets for each one of the phase 2 pathways. So in the customized version, the middle section is actually filled out with those courses that you just saw on the slides preceding. And there will also be a suggested mathematics course in the course title area of the MTA box there. So this is what we're asking institutions to submit. You will be able to find that to download and then go ahead and input your own institutional detail into these worksheets. And we're using a Canvas forum in order to collect these worksheets. And we will talk through how folks can connect to that in order to complete this part of the work. The bottom section, I'm sorry, Erica. The bottom section is what I was alluding to as those strategic transfer electives. This is the only space really where community colleges and universities have different instructions. The community college should only be listing exact courses there that are kind of extra or additional graduation requirements, either in the program area or more likely what you would think of as like an institutional graduation requirement, perhaps an additional gen ed or a specific gen ed course, or some other type of graduation requirement. That should be the only courses that community colleges are listing there. But then if there are remaining hours that students need in order to meet the minimum requirement for that degree, a number will go into that little box down at the bottom that says CC only, add remaining hours. The universities, this is where you can note strategic elective courses that a community college student might have looked at their customized worksheet for their community college and say, hey, I have 9 additional hours in that add remaining hours box. What courses could I take that would be most efficient for my transfer pathway? And our hope is that the universities will be able to identify the courses that, again, were not common and couldn't be included in the previous section, that the MiTransfer courses, but courses that could be taken for transfer in the first 2 years of their program. And that's where the community college student will have the opportunity to sort of shop around and say, well, if I have these 9 extra credits, which university should I think about as I look at having additional transferable options? So that's what's going on with the worksheet, and we will ask that you'll upload those on our Canvas forum, which I'll describe to you in just a moment. The extension of the program worksheets is the course equivalency work, which we expect will occur between and among all participating institutions. Sometimes people, when they ask me about this, they're surprised that, yes, we do mean that you will develop and maintain an equivalency between and among all participating institutions. That's what happens now in institutional articulation agreements. The institutions are agreeing that the courses are equivalent. And in order for this multi-institutional agreement to work, we have to maintain the same equivalency between and among participating institutions. So what does that mean for you? That means that we do expect that you will have developed equivalencies for the courses that are listed on your program worksheets. And once those are developed, you will upload the data into the Michigan Transfer Network in order for that to become transparently available to the public. What you're seeing on the screen on the left is a vision of what that MTN database looks like now. And then on the right, of course, is what you've seen already as what the new version will look like. And some people will say, well, why do we have to upload on the old version because we're getting a new one? And it's because, first of all, students still need the information now. We can't ask them to wait until spring to plan their transfer, but also because the uploads will be very, very similar. And so it's really a good idea if your institution has not been connected to the MTN to date to go ahead and get things in order. And once you start making those routine uploads, even on the current site, you'll be in great shape then to be able to see the database for the new site as it becomes live in the spring. So we do expect that you will do that work at the institutional level between and among the campuses, and we have provided a few resources to try and help make those equivalencies. The first, and I think probably the most productive for you all, is the Canvas site. And in later this week, the phase 2 participants will receive instructions for how to connect with the Canvas site. It is a self-enrollment process, so folks will need to watch their email, and then you can go ahead and log on to that. Some of you on the webinar today, if you don't receive that message because you were not at the meeting, you should contact your sector representative and they can share the connection details with you. But essentially, once you get in, it acts just like an online course where we are all students together, and you need to find the appropriate module for the pathway that you're working in to find discussion boards where you will upload the materials that are requested. So that's how we're using Canvas. I think the next slide shows what one of those modules looks like. So you'll see here this is an example of the business module, and we are simply using discussion pods in each, or discussion boards in each module to request the uploads. So we are asking you to upload the worksheet, which we just reviewed together, but also syllabi for those MiTransfer Pathways courses. And in phase 2, we are also asking for syllabi for a few of the strategic elective type courses to see if we can help facilitate transfer of those courses. And it will only work as a document repository if people upload their documents. So we really hope that community colleges and universities will use this space to share syllabi en masse and provide that transparency to one another as peers, and work off of that to help build those equivalencies. So we hope that you'll find that to be useful. And then, yes, Erica, I was going to go into where you can find more information on who to contact at partner institutions as needed. You'll see what we're showing here is the project webpage. You heard Erica describe earlier the MiTransfer.org website, which will house the new transfer database. This website that's tracking our project is MiTransfer.net, so MiTransfer.net. And up at the top where it says MiTransfer Pathways, there's a drop-down menu for the phase 2 project, or phase 2 part of the project. And you can find meeting 1 for phase 2, and that's where we're at here. This has all of the resources that were shared during that meeting, including what you see encircled below, the attendee list. So if you have a partner institution where you need to develop an equivalency, we recommend that you go to that list and find the person that's representing that pathway at that institution and begin to work together to build that equivalency. Once you build the equivalency and you put it up into the MTN, I'm working with a student employee, and he and I are creating what we're calling course equivalency matrices. You can see on the screen it says coming soon. There are actually a few sample matrices available for each one of the pathways that are live on the site now. And in a moment, I'm going to show you what those course equivalency matrices look like and how you might be able to use them to track your institution's equivalencies. If you need help with the MTN, this is not where you find it. This is actually where you find additional contacts at the institutions, who are typically the folks who are inputting data into the MTN. So some of the faculty that we've been working with indicate they are not sure at their institution who it is that uploads data to the MTN, because typically it's not a faculty member. Typically it's someone in the records or registrar's office. And this is where on the current MichiganTransferNetwork.org website, you can locate details about who your liaison to the MTN is at your institution. If your institution has never utilized the MTN before, there is some support available through MSU, who generously hosts the MTN, and you can see on the screen there, MSU is actually listed, and Chris Schutte is also listed, and she has offered her support in a limited capacity, but at least can get you pointed in the right direction if your institution needs it. Once you've uploaded the data into the MTN on the new equivalencies that you develop, we are going to be developing a timeline schedule that will let you know when we will be going back into the Michigan Transfer Network database to update the course equivalency matrices, which is what you're seeing on the screen before you now. These matrices, this is an example for Calculus 1. Essentially, they are performed manually, so this is not a report that is auto-generated from the current MTN site, although there is a report like this under development in the new site, which is very exciting, particularly to me. However, what this shows is what we see currently in the MTN. So across the top are the universities and the courses that fulfill that particular course. And then on the left side, you see the community college with the similar course information. And then in the middle, in the matrix, what you're seeing are the equivalencies that are or are not current in the MTN. So the green boxes indicate a direct equivalency for between the two courses. The yellow boxes are probably a data error. I would not be concerned about that. But the white boxes are where the work needs to be done. So either there is no equivalency developed between those institutions, or there is no data uploaded to the MTN. And either one of those scenarios are possible. But we are hinging on that, and it is our ability to update this matrix for your institution is predicated on your ability to build the equivalency and put it into the MTN. So as I said, we're working on a timeline schedule for when those equivalency details need to be input, it will be in advance of the second meeting for phase 2, which is scheduled for May 14th of 2019. We will be meeting at the Lansing Community College West Campus. Please don't go to the downtown campus, go to the West Campus. And we will, again, ask for some of these materials in advance of the meeting, including the program worksheets, which we are asking for by April the 1st to be uploaded to the Canvas site. And then we will be back in touch on a deadline, so to speak, for the course equivalency work so that we can provide the updated matrices to everyone at the spring meeting. Ooh, here we go. We're almost done. The last thing that was discussed is that because the state is funding this work, we have had the opportunity to allocate funds for institutional travel stipends for faculty and administrators that participate in the project. These are valued at $200 per meeting. However, because this is a high volume project, to make business processing easier for us, we are paying these out in succession after the spring meeting. That doesn't mean you have to attend both meetings in order to be eligible for the stipends. It just means that we aren't going to institute the reimbursement process and the paperwork until after the May 14th meeting. So if you attend just one meeting, you can receive a $200 stipend. If you attend both, you have the opportunity to receive a $400 stipend. And those details will be further described after the spring meeting to all of our participants. We've allowed 3 minutes for questions and discussion, but certainly please feel free to reach out to any of us. Our contact information, the project team's contact information is on the screen. And I know that I'm always very happy to hear from people if there are things I can clarify, and my colleagues are as well. Phew, once again, we really gave you the Cliffs Notes version. Erica, are there questions that we should entertain before we hang up?
I don't see any questions right now, but thank you to Will and Shannon and Katie for joining us today to share this information, and for all of you who attended as well. We understand that this is a very big project with a lot of stakeholders involved, so we appreciate that you were willing to come to this webinar today to learn more about this project. As somebody said, this webinar is being recorded, and we will process that and publish it on the MiTransfer website on the same page that all the meeting information is that we shared with you. And then while I'm waiting to see if anybody else has any other questions, I will just point out that in the chat pane, I provided you with the links that you can go to for the MiTransfer.net site where our project materials are housed, the new website for MiTransfer.org, which will be launched in May of 2019. And then I mentioned that we have a development site that anybody can go look at right now to watch the development of the new site. And as always, we are still in development, so any of us would be happy to receive your feedback about that website as well. So not seeing any other questions, and that we are at 4 o'clock, I'll go ahead and thank you all for joining us, and we'll look forward to talking with you about this project again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.